Order! Order! You are an incorrigible delinquent at times. Behave yourself, man!
It is, of course, still for the dust to completely settle. But here are the facts as I followed them. Shortly after getting off air yesterday, all of this unfolded. And for the record, if I had been on air, here's the really interesting thing. Let me start with the confession. If I had been on air yesterday, and as you may have gathered, I keep a very close eye on breaking news stories while I'm on air, as close as I can without being distracted from our daily toing and froing together. And Twitter has become, over the last few years, an absolutely crucial portal into what is going on in the world of politics. All of the big players are on there, and all of them use it now to relay and report stories in between the traditional opportunities, the traditional bulletins, or the traditional two-ways, as I think we call them. And against that backdrop, then, yesterday, I think if I'd been on air, I would have said to you, I'm receiving reports that an aide to the Secretary of State for Health, Matt Hancock, has been punched by a Labour activist. I think I would have done. I don't know. Maybe I'd have waited. Well, and that's the thing, you see. Just to put my own flaws and foibles up front first before I start picking over other people's, I think I would have waited for footage.
Boris Johnson's campaign was tonight rocked by a new controversy over the state of the NHS. It began with a newspaper photo showing a 4-year-old boy who had been forced to sleep on the floor of an overcrowded hospital, which Jeremy Corbyn called a disgrace to our society. Then, in an extraordinary sequence of events, the Prime Minister pocketed the phone of an ITV News reporter who was trying to show him the picture before agreeing to look at it and apologising for what it showed.
The picture that broke hearts and triggered one of the more important disputes of this election. A 4-year-old boy at Leeds General Infirmary struggling to breathe with suspected pneumonia, left on the floor of A&E for hours. And Joe Pike, an ITV reporter, assumed the Prime Minister would want to say sorry.
How do you feel looking at that photo?
Of course. And let me tell you that I haven't had a chance to look at it.
Why don't you look at it now, Prime Minister? You refuse to look at the photo. You've taken my phone, put it in your pocket, Prime Minister. His mother says the NHS is in crisis. What's your response to that?
I'm sorry. It's a terrible, terrible photo, and I apologise, obviously, to the families and all those who have terrible experiences in the NHS.
As a father of 3 small children, who myself have spent long evenings in A&E, I know how it feels, and I feel terrible for anybody who has to go through that.
Do you apologise to the family?
Yes, of course. And to anybody who gets service from the NHS that isn't up to the standard that they should expect.
And then, to round off an emotional day for both big parties, a few protesters sent Hancock home with a flea in his ear.
You are not welcome in this brown hospital!
And one of Hancock's aides was poked in the face. But despite what many of us were told by the Tories, it was plainly an accident.
I think. But whether or not I could have completely ignored the calibre of the correspondence reporting that a punch had been thrown, I genuinely don't know. I think I probably would have gone with it. When I saw the names of the senior political editors tweeting that a punch had been thrown, when I saw the names of the correspondents reporting that story, I think I would have taken it on trust and not waited for the evidence of my own eyes and ears. Do you know, I just tapped the side of my head next to my eyes then when I said my own eyes and ears. It's pathetic, really. My own eyes and ears. So I think I would have gone with it. And I would have been horribly wrong. Because when the footage emerged, I would have seen that no such thing happened. An aide to Matt Hancock, very briefly and accidentally, felt the fingers of a gesticulating activist who had his back turned to him at the time. If that was the incident they were referring to, or if it was completely invented, I do not know. But it didn't happen. So, within 10 minutes of telling you yesterday that and I probably would have said it's been reported by, and then I might have named the two most senior political journalists in the country, who had clearly been told by, I mean, they said so, conservative sources, that a punch had been thrown when it hadn't. Now, in most circumstances, you could at least inflate the balloon of genuine error, couldn't you? Except for the fact that the story Matt Hancock was in Leeds to hopefully diffuse was the story of the 4-year-old boy with suspected pneumonia lying on a pile of coats in the floor of A&E. A story which has been confirmed by Leeds General Hospital and apologised for. That seems to me to be perhaps the most unbelievable element of what then followed. The hospital has confirmed the story of the little boy lying on the pile of coats with suspected pneumonia because they didn't have a bed ready for him. Heartbreaking story. Front of the Mirror. It was bubbling along, as these things often do these days. Before it hit the newsstands, it was bubbling along under the social media or on the social media surface, and then boom, the Daily Mirror, which I would remind you has been banned from the Prime Minister's battle bus, now driving itself front and centre to the heart of the news agenda yesterday. The reason why I'm laying this all out for you again is because I know now that the effort that has been put into persuading you not to trust the evidence of your own eyes and ears is immense. So, number one, boy on floor, right? That's the story. Number two, Boris Johnson asked by an ITV journalist called Joe Pike, formerly of this parish and soon to join Sky News. This is some announcement of his elevation to the national stage, isn't it? Currently working for the Calendar programme in Yorkshire, the regional ITV news programme, and so far the scoop of the campaign for young Pike. Boris Johnson is asked about the boy on the floor by Joe Pike. Boris Johnson does what Conservative and Labour politicians, and presumably all the others as well, are increasingly conditioned to do, which is to claim they haven't seen it. So it's a great cop-out. Do you remember that Jack Straw story, which I used to share with you in the good old days with a sense of academic interest rather than a sense of abject horror that we feel now as we survey some of the so-called journalism being presented to the British public? There was a Jack Straw story when he was Foreign Secretary. Anyway, when he was in the cabinet, I can't remember. And he was being driven to the studios of Radio 4 for the Today programme, back when it was a massive power. Actually, that was a bit cheap. I withdraw that. And there was a report that had been published. I can't even remember what it was into. And he didn't want to answer questions about it, but he needed to know what was in it. And this curious combination of a desire to be honest coupled with a desire to avoid uncomfortable truths created a scenario in which an aide in the back of the ministerial car read him the story. He had it read to him. So the legend is that when he then arrived in the studio and was asked questions about the report, he could say, without feeling his conscience clobber him, he could say, "Oh, well, I haven't read it, I'm very sorry." That seems to be, I don't know why, that seems to me to be a massive signpost for the way things have subsequently gone, because Jack Straw is one of those people, if he cheated at PlayStation and beat you, he'd feel really, really bad about it afterwards. You can make your own conclusions about into which of my 3 PlayStation categories any politician fits. Couldn't cheat in a million years. Might cheat but would feel awful afterwards. Would cheat without even thinking twice just to secure that victory. Some interesting details, actually, in one article today about Boris Johnson's approach to playing tennis that you might find illuminating. So, boy on floor. Boris Johnson asked by journalist about boy on floor. Boris Johnson tries to claim he hasn't seen the picture, at which point journalist shows him picture. And this is where everything went absolutely bonkers, because somehow the journalist's phone ended up in Boris Johnson's pocket. And this almost incomprehensible refusal just to look at the picture. That's what happens when you're following a slightly eccentric media policy, when you're following the instructions of your advisors. Do not admit you've seen it, and then they hold it up in front of you. What do? Don't admit you've seen the picture. Just deny all knowledge of it. You remember that in the debates, of course, he denied all knowledge of documents that had been published by his own Treasury because it meant he couldn't be properly questioned about them. On this occasion, deny all knowledge of the picture, which is a little naive given the technology that we all carry around in our pockets, because Joe Pike, the ITV journalist, then goes, well, here's the picture. And then everything went mad. And the phone ended up in the Prime Minister's pocket, and the interview concluded with the journalist saying, you've refused to answer the question, you've refused to look at the picture, and my phone is in your pocket, Prime Minister. That's going to be up there in years to come with, I suspect, the Gillian Duffy moment for Gordon Brown. I don't know if it'll have any electoral impact, but certainly in terms of the legends of political legacy, my phone is in your pocket, Prime Minister. You've put my phone in your pocket, Prime Minister. So that immediately becomes a huge story. That is a forest fire of a story, right? By anybody's standards, and whoever the politician was. Sadly, we live in a world where, had it been the leader of the Labour Party, the reaction of much of the print media would have been very different. But broadcast media generally weighs these things equally, usually. So, the challenge for Downing Street, whoever it may be, who revels in the title Conservative Source or Senior Conservative Source, many people think it's Dominic Cummings. That's sort of the obvious conclusion, but he, of course, is not at work at the moment. So, well, officially not at work at the moment, so it may be a slightly lazy reach. But senior Tory sources then, after the Health Secretary was dispatched to Leeds to somehow try to put out some elements of this forest fire that Boris Johnson had inadvertently ignited, Matthew Hancock gets to Leeds, and he obviously isn't going to be able to change the news agenda. What's he going to do? The hospital have confirmed the story. The mother of the little boy has made it clear that she has no complaints against the staff of the NHS. It's clearly a question about resources. She has warned that the NHS is in parlous danger. And here's little Matty Hancock charged with somehow trying to stick his finger in the dike and stop the flood from subsuming the rest of the day's news. He's not up to the job. The facts don't let him. And then suddenly we're all talking about the fact that one of his aides has been punched. And the reason why we're talking about it is because the political editors of the BBC and ITV both reported that senior Conservative sources had said that an aide to the Secretary of State for Health had been punched by a Labour activist. And because of the calibre of those contributors, everyone believed it. As they should. Because senior Conservative sources shouldn't lie to senior political editors, and generally don't. They will be economical with the actuality. They will try and put a spin on a story. They will try and move the spotlight from one element of a story to another story. But maybe I'm being naive, and if I am, I'm sure you'll tell me. The calibre of those two correspondents was such that the rest of us wouldn't question the story, you know, for good or for ill, that there is a point. It's sort of just a convention. Well, that's if it was Theo Usherwood, I, for example, would take it as read. But it wasn't true. And do you know what? That's only half time on this particular story. I think this is a story of almost unparalleled importance. I really do. And not in a good way, obviously, because I think it's a canary down a coal mine moment. And if the canary conks out anytime soon, there'll be plenty of people taking to Twitter to tell you that their sister's friend knew that canary, and actually it didn't conk out at all. The canary was just faking it. The canary was lying on the floor of the coal mine in order to scaremonger and create political capital out of the fact that noxious fumes had leaked into the atmosphere. The canary's not dead at all. In fact, my sister knows someone who works with the canary, and the canary was flying around happily while all of the media was printing this picture of a canary lying dead on the floor of the coal mine. And if you haven't got a clue what I'm talking about now, that's because you're not yet across the second half of this saga. So you better stay exactly where you are. Now, I'm told there will be some more story, lovely accidental verbal slip, more story. There'll be some more details involving the story of the lad on the floor of Leeds A&E emerging, I think, before we come off air today, so keep them peeled for that. But here we are, halfway through this story. A 4-year-old boy with suspected pneumonia is forced to lie on the floor on a pile of coats because of a shortage of beds at Leeds General Infirmary. His mother understandably takes a photograph because tomorrow it could be your child. So if you swallowed so much Kool-Aid today that you go, I can't believe she's making a political point out of this, then how would you know, if you were thinking of taking your child with suspected pneumonia to Leeds General Infirmary, that he could end up sleeping on the floor on a pile of coats with an oxygen tube up his nose? How would you know if she hadn't told you? Or don't want to know? Well, then you're an idiot. OK, so glad to clear that one up. Boris Johnson is asked about it, claims he hasn't seen the picture, gets shown the picture, puts the journalist's phone upon which the picture is displayed in his pocket while still refusing to look at it or answer the question, a situation which obviously can't be sustained indefinitely. So almost at the end of the interview, he has to take it out of his pocket, look at it and apologise. It's just a car crash on a scale that is almost unimaginable. In fact, you know what? The best way to get a full picture of just what an enormous catastrophe this could be, imagine if it had happened to a Labour leader. Whoa! Then you get an idea of what an enormous catastrophe this could be on today's front pages. So we've got to get it out of the news. How are we going to get it out of the news? Hello, is that the political editor of the BBC? No, it's the political editor of ITV. Oh, well, that'll do. Yeah, both of you. I've got you. So, anyway, look, I'd seen your Conservative source here. One of Matt Hancock's aides has just been punched in the face by a Labour activist outside Leeds General Infirmary. Right, stop all the clocks. We're going in huge on the punch. Forget about the boy on the floor. Forget about the phone in the pocket. We're going big on the punch. This being 2019, not 1919, footage then emerges that shows there was no punch, and senior political journalists are forced, somewhat embarrassingly, to withdraw. And now we come to the second bit of the story, which is an astonishing attempt on social media this morning to malign the mother of the 4-year-old boy. Now, you cannot trace this back to senior Conservative sources, but I can tell you that journalists who should know better, off the top of my head, Alison Pearson at the Daily Telegraph, claiming to have information that demonstrates the original photograph is somehow, I think, I'm blocked by her, but other people have tweeted her comments, claiming that it's 100% fake. I'm not fully up to date with my libel training, but I'm not sure I need to be to say that that is very thin ice legally, given that, and I'll tell you again, the mother is on the record and the hospital have confirmed the story and apologised for it. So quite what journalism school you go to where a mother makes a claim that is confirmed by the hospital apologises for it, and you think, I smell some fish here, I'm going to go public with the claim that this isn't true. And then a veritable army, an army of bots inflate this story, all identically phrased. Some of them will be real people retweeting it and recycling it. One of the great challenges that the country faces at the moment is working out who is real and who isn't in these media Twitter storms. So the story then becomes, oh, it's not real. And it becomes inflated to such a point that even people with newspaper columns and radio shows are repeating the lie. And it is a lie. The first lie came from senior Conservative sources. The second lie came from social media accounts, which most experts attest have, in recent months, been funded mysteriously or set up in circumstances that are far from transparent. So, number one, boy on a floor. Number two, Boris Johnson's phone ends up in his pocket. Number three, Matt Hancock's aide gets, quote, punched, end quote. 4, no, he wasn't. 5, oh, well, the woman's lying anyway. And I will now, with the most cursory glance at my inbox, be able to find presumably real people who are determined to believe the lie. You can't really believe the first lie, can you? Because you've seen the footage now. You've seen the evidence of your own eyes and ears. So you know that he wasn't punched. The second lie is what they have given to you in order to allow you to pretend that you haven't been mugged. It's very Brexity, all this. Here is another lie, which you won't really be able to prove one way or the other, not as categorically as you can with the footage of the aide not being punched. But if you just start shouting this lie, you won't have to apologise or withdraw the other lie. And here you are. Here you are. Well, here you go. Texting me saying, desperate stuff, O'Brien, really desperate. So you got lied to about the punch, and now you've been lied to about the photograph. And you're so desperate to cling on to the idea that these people aren't mugging you that you think I am somehow relevant to your own mental gymnastics, let alone important to your mental gymnastics. But that's what you've been reduced to. And I don't get it anymore. You're not going to like this either, but it reminds me of the anti-Semitism in the Labour Party and the desperation to deny the most obvious of evidence, because the alternative is to admit that that scarf that you've got around your neck involves blind tribal loyalty to somebody who doesn't deserve your loyalty or your trust. So I have spent the last 4 years staring at people's claims that this is a smear or that this is made up or that this is a media conspiracy, when the evidence is there. It's clear. It's categorical, but admitting it would, of course, diminish the messianic status of your hero. And now on the other side of the political divide, the most incontrovertible of evidence that X happened, and you are so desperate to keep that scarf tied around your neck that you are now arguing that it didn't. I would love you to ring me and tell me how they managed to do this to you, but I accept that that's probably too big an ask. If you're there furiously retweeting this absolute nonsense, a made-up story that can't even get the name of the hospital right. My friend is a sister at the hospital or something like that. Absolute nonsense. You've seen it. If you haven't seen it, lucky you. It means that your social media is curated to such a degree that you don't get bombarded by lies from mysterious, undisclosed sources. That is where we now are, okay? That is it. That is syllable by syllable an account of where we are. And right now, people who are paid to keep you up to date with the information you need to exercise your democratic right to vote honestly and freely are amplifying the lies. Politicians via social media and reportedly in radio interviews, pundits, commentators, journalists who are paid to give you the information you need to cast your vote honestly are spreading lies about an NHS story that the NHS has confirmed. So what the hell am I going to ask you this morning? 27 minutes after 10 is the time. If you're kind enough, or maybe you've seen the light as a result of this very straightforward and utterly evidence-based account of what's happened in the last 24 hours, and you will ring me and say, good grief, James, I'm so sorry. Or maybe not sorry, you don't need to apologise to me. I was one of the mugs, and this is how it happened. Is it as simple as I suggest? Is it just a desperate desire to cling to the notion that your cult leader deserves your loyalty? So any evidence, and this is the Brexit cult, isn't it really? Any evidence that they don't deserve your loyalty must be dismissed, even to the point of mistrusting the evidence of your eyes and ears. The party's final, most essential command. How have we come to this? 0345 6060 973. And why does it work? The great mystery, of course, at the heart of all of this is the inability for any of us, you or me, to know how many of these social media accounts are real and how many of them are being operated from a bunker in Basingstoke or a bot farm in St. Petersburg. I don't know, you don't know. For the time being, we can't know. So how did it happen? And how do we fix it? And if you've fallen for it, you get no criticism from me. Look at the effort that's been put into misleading you, into conning you. Bring it back to the Brexit cult. That effort is 4 years old now, or more. But how did you end up falling for it? 0345 6060 973. I'd like to dedicate this morning's monologue to Steve Allen, who every day on LBC manages to make absolutely brilliant radio without ever taking any phone calls. However, I can't carry on until 1 o'clock without opening up my phone lines, not least because I can't wait to see what you have to say. That is the facts. You now have the facts. If you're still denying them, don't send me a tweet from your account with the bulldog avatar. Give me a ring. And tell me how they managed to do this to you. Where once it was, I mean, still very, very dangerous, but confined to social media, so your Facebook page, your Auntie Doris's Facebook page, could be full of things that have been paid for, bought and paid for, but aren't true, in many cases that have been disproved. The money trail is opaque. You can't work out where the money has come from, but it has paid for false information to be pumped into various Facebook feeds, designed to mislead people into, in my opinion, voting against their own interests. And yesterday we saw it arrive kicking and screaming in the middle of the mainstream national news agenda when the two most senior political journalists in the country reported that senior Conservative sources had told them that an aide to Matt Hancock had been punched by a Labour activist when they hadn't. So, what do? 0345 60 60973. And I appreciate you're not ready yet, but someone will be, some of you will be. How have they managed to do this to you? What do you get in return? Ian is in Leamington Spa. Ian, what would you like to say?
Hi, James. Yeah, I just wanted to draw your attention to the the Times this morning. I'm looking at the online edition.
Okay.
But I'm sure it's the same. Just a Murdoch newspaper here. Front page, nothing about this at all. If you go onto the news, then about page 3 on the online edition is Johnson talking about the licence fee.
Yeah, the Mail and the Times have gone big on that. You're quite right. To be fair,
about page 10, Johnson talking about HS2 and Heathrow, and then on page 17 or something, PM criticised for reaction to boy on floor.
Well, there you go.
As far as I can see, nothing whatsoever about the Matt Hancock story.
And your point is?
Well, just my point is, this is just, well, you know what, it's just ridiculous. These are the big.
But is it though? Is it though? Is it ridiculous? I mean, what newspapers have gone big with it?
I don't know. I haven't.
So let's reach immediately. So the Mirror has another picture on its front page of another baby in another A&E with just a cardigan as a blanket, and it breaks your heart. But the right-wing newspapers all go down the BBC dead cat line. Oh, okay. The Guardian has Tories accused of lying to distract from image of boy on hospital floor. But here's the thing, right? I take your point, and I understand why you mentioned the provenance of the Times. For my money, it's the best newspaper in the country, but that's by the by.
Well, and mine, because that's why I download it.
That's why you're there. That's why you're there with your online subscription.
Yeah,
Newspapers are not required to be impartial during election periods. No, they're really not. So the idea that the owners of the Mail and the Times and the Sun and the Express, actually the Express doesn't work because it's owned by the same people that own the Mirror now. Yeah. But generally speaking, the idea that they will want the news to be couched in such a way that suits their political ends, Telegraph most obviously, of course, that's fine. What today's story is about, I think, and that's why I slightly facetiously said, and your point is about the national news providers, in this case ITN and the BBC, and two brilliant journalists for whom I have enormous amounts of respect and affection. And it's not their fault they got lied to, any more than it's your fault you got lied to the last time.
I'm just stunned that, as you describe it, the best newspaper in the country, doesn't even mention that this morning. It's not mentioning the Hancock story at all, and its top political story, which is only on page 3, on a bad news day for the Tories, they're basically ignoring it all. They're basically tucking it away somewhere.
Yes, they are. But I say it again, that is less surprising and less problematical than the national news broadcasters going down the same road. In fact, in many ways, your point has its most power when you say, well, the impartial national news broadcasters might as well be working for the people that publish these newspapers.
Yeah.
Strange times, Ian. How do we get out of it? I seem to spend every day spending hours on my introductions, and then all my callers, all of my call-ins boil down to how do we get out of the rabbit hole?
I've got no idea. We have I mean, I'm one of these disenfranchised voters, really. The two main parties now are so extreme right and so extreme left that I don't really want to vote for for either of them, and I think either of them getting in with a majority would be an absolute disaster. So
I hear you, and I know that an awful lot of people feel similarly dispossessed, if not quite disenfranchised. And that's the problem, really. How do we get out of this rabbit hole? 10:38 is the time. None of the MSM is running with it, James, because they don't want us talking about it. Propaganda is half the battle. Controlling the narrative is the other. Well, I mean, this is mainstream media. It doesn't get much more mainstream than a national radio station. The Guardian is mainstream media. The Mirror is mainstream media, but they lean to the left. So newspapers will do the bidding of, I mean, it's a chicken and egg scenario, the tail wagging the dog scenario. Do they follow the readers, or do the readers follow them? The point is, if you want to exercise that sort of power over the population, then all you need to do is make a ton of money and buy yourself a newspaper. I'm interested in the truth, and the truth is Matt Hancock's aide did not get punched, and the BBC and ITV both reported that senior Conservative sources had told them that he did. So how the hell do you fix that now? Because if Brexit has taught us anything, it's taught us that liars don't stop lying once they've achieved their goal. They just set themselves another goal and start lying all over again. 10:39 is the time. Nick is in Kidderminster, God's own country. Nick, what would you like to say?
Hello, mate. Yeah, blimey, you asked how they're getting away with it. I mean, I'm just a dad. I don't know the answers, but I do a lot of community work. I was on an estate in Leeds just last week. I do a lot of work up there on the Seacroft estate. And those people don't care. Now, when I say
but did they know? They're not. Are they going to know? I mean, I don't like these broad and sweeping generalisations, but are they going to be across every chapter of the story as I detailed it over the first half hour of the programme?
Do you know what I mean? Exactly. When I say they don't care, I mean they don't care about Brexit, they don't care about politics, because I honestly believe a lot of those people have been broken. They're broken by grinding poverty. They're broken by cuts to education. I mean, the arts and stuff like. I mean, have you seen that Clean Bandit film? They've nailed it this morning.
No.
They've made it. Oh my God, mate! They've made a film.
I've got a show to put together. I can't be hanging around on YouTube watching
kids. My kids told me about it. My kids are actually sick of Tory adverts coming up on YouTube, and they show me this film.
I'm sure there are kids who are sick of Labour adverts coming up on YouTube as well.
There are two parts to choose from. But basically, this Clean Bandit advert is beautiful, and it talks about basically how we've got to vote for your kids. Now, I would rephrase that. The whole Brexit thing, afterwards, granddads were saying, I did it for you. I said, don't say you did that for my kids. And what we've got to do, we've got to think this is an election for our kids and all our futures. You know, the arts have been killed in schools. Look at Stormzy. Have you seen he's got an art piece in the National Portrait Gallery at the moment? A black kid off an estate has got an artwork in the National Portrait Gallery. And yesterday, a teacher tweeted a picture of Stormzy saying, I'm using you to inspire kids to get their heads around Macbeth. You can't make this up, because the education...
We're going off on a bit of a tangent. I do understand why, and I understand your passion for the field in which you speak, but the question's pretty straightforward, is what do we do now? Now that the lies have moved off Facebook and onto the Twitter accounts of the political editors who will be feeding into the news at 10, they've apologised, but they haven't revealed who lied to them, and of course they can't do that because... access, one of the weird strengths of this programme's sort of inability to attract major politicians to be quizzed live on air is, of course, that I don't need to worry about losing access to the major politicians because I don't have any in the first place. So I can say all this stuff, but I can tell you now, the boss will be having a fit of the heebie-jeebies. They'll be saying, you know, can we get O'Brien to wind his neck in a little bit? Otherwise, we might not get XXX to come on the show, on someone else's show tomorrow. And that is the tightrope that they have to walk and I have to walk. But the political editors of the BBC and ITV swallowed hook, line and sinker a demonstrable lie from what they described as senior Conservative sources, and we're all supposed to just pack up and go home and carry on as normal tomorrow. That's the bit I don't get.
You've nailed it there, James. You said, what do we do? Because there's a lot of talk. I got really fed up yesterday seeing all my Liberal friends in their little bubbles on Facebook moaning about this, that and the other.
Yes.
And yesterday I wrote a book last summer about 9 inspiring stories for parents to read to their kids.
Nick, I love you like a brother, but we went off on one tangent already. I'm going to have to wait for the film of your life to find out the details of your actual book. Give me in a sentence the line that sums up what do we do.
I've launched a crowdfunder yesterday, and I'm renting a big screen, led by Donkey Star. I'm going on to that estate in Leeds tomorrow to show...
Well, I wish you well, I really do, but, you know, whether or not your big screen will persuade people who you described yourself as not giving a fig about anything to suddenly give a fig about everything, only time will tell. I don't want to sound discouraging or pessimistic. 10:43 is the time. Phone lines are open. Hit the numbers now. You should get through. Be quick, though. 0345 6060 973. Here is the problem. The two most senior political journalists in the country, who I do not join the criticism of for being biased or for doing the bidding of one party or the other. The bottom line is you cannot do that job without access. Ask Theo Usherwood. The Daily Mirror demonstrate what happens if you upset the wrong people. They've been thrown off the Conservative Party's bus. Peter Oborne makes the point that when Beth Rigby of Sky News was... or when Laura Kunsberg of BBC was booed at a Labour Party event, Jeremy Corbyn stood up and said that all journalists will be heard. And I think when Beth Rigby of Sky News was booed at a Conservative Party event, Boris Johnson didn't do that. Peter Oborne invites you to read into that what you will. A Conservative commentator, a Brexit voter and a former Daily Mail columnist, so clearly a fully paid-up member of the Marxist left. That's the problem. I don't know what to do now, because if I was a political editor and I had been lied to by a senior Labour source or a senior Conservative source, and I'd been publicly busted for believing that lie, I don't know what I could do. This is what I meant at 10 o'clock when I said phone-ins about journalism aren't always interesting to anyone except journalists. But this one, looking at my switchboard, clearly is. I don't know what would you do? That's the question. If you were a political editor of one of the two biggest broadcasters in Britain, and you've been lied to by a senior Conservative source or a senior Labour source to such a degree, to such an egregious degree, that the people who lied to you knew you were going to get busted for it, but their priority was simply to move the needle of the news agenda for 2-3 hours, successfully, in retrospect, that's what they used you for. But if you lose access to the people that lied to you, you won't get on the news at 10 tomorrow because you won't have a story. If you lose access to the people that lied to you, you won't have a job by Christmas. If you lose access to the people that lied to you, you might as well hang your headphones up now and go home. So what would you do? It's very easy to criticise and condemn these people, and I'm not defending them. I think I'm, as ever, walking the line between an excuse and an explanation. Very different things. So what would you do? You are the political editor of JOB, okay? The biggest broadcasting company in the country. Just give it time. You're the political editor of JOB, right? JOB, political editor here. Senior Labour/Conservative sources say that the moon is made of cheese. I have in my hand, 2 hours later, a piece of moon. It is not made of cheese. What do you do about the people that told you it was? This might be a bit too in-house, a bit too beltway, as they say in... America, but in DC, I think. But it seems to me to be, well, it's the question that intrigues me the most. What would you do if your job depended upon access to individuals and those individuals or the gatekeepers for those individuals had lied to you in such a way that involved a humiliating public climb down? What do you do? Wait for the next message to come from them and treat it the same? What do you do? It's a fascinating question, and I'm genuinely intrigued by your answers. I'm also going to introduce you shortly to the editor of the Yorkshire Post, the man who oversees as well the Yorkshire Evening Post, because I've just been shown a Twitter well, it's not even a Twitter, an email that he sent to a reader asking him questions about that very email I referred to, that very tweet I referred to earlier, the one that is a complete lie, but which has ended up being talked about on radio stations and on social media by extremely well-paid newspaper columnists. 10:50 is the time. You're listening to James O'Brien on LBC. Something's gone a little bit wrong with my screen. Forgive me for the intervention. And Andrew is in Whitstable. Andrew, what would you like to say?
Yeah, hello, James.
Hello.
Yeah, I mean, you mentioned, what would you do if you couldn't have access to your sources? I mean, obviously the first thing that springs to mind is, well, you wouldn't be told any more lies. Do you know what I mean?
No, but you wouldn't have any stories.
Well, yeah, but the point is, that begs the question, doesn't it? What are these stories? The stories are told. What are the journalists there for, it seems to me, at the moment? Journalists, to a large extent, if they talk to people, to get their stories, almost by definition, these people that tell the stories are spinning you. They're just giving you the story.
Not like this. There's spin, and there is. I mean, this is why, to me, today or yesterday, the last 24 hours feels so pivotal, because there's spin. Spin is fine. He didn't punch him. He ran into my fist. That kind of thing. You know, we all get our heads around that. But this is a barefaced and demonstrable untruth, reported blindly by the most senior political journalists in the land. Good journalists, for the record.
Yeah, but the point is that the fact is you're still in that position, aren't you? You're still in that position where you formed a relationship with somebody, or not, as the case may be, but that person is then telling you a story, and you hope it's true, but they're still manipulating you into a position where you go out there until you tell your story, you make your money by writing the copy, etc., etc. But I mean, you know, it's all I'm saying is that it seems to me that journalists so rarely these days do their job independently of what they're being told. You know what I mean? I mean, you need to dig out stories where people don't want you to tell you the stories.
Yeah, I get exactly what you're saying, and I'm not going to punch any holes in it at all. But there is a difference between being a news journalist chasing a myriad of stories and being a dedicated political correspondent whose livelihood depends upon your personal relationships with people, senior people in the major political parties.
That's a precarious position to be in, isn't it?
What would you do now? What would you do if you'd run a story yesterday about Matt Hancock's aide getting punched by a Labour activist, and then the footage dropped on your screen and you looked at it, you ring up your source, what do you say?
Well, I suppose you would just somehow try and redress the balance.
How? You see the problem?
Yeah, well, obviously it is a problem, yes. But I mean, you are put in an impossible situation. But I mean, I think I still go back to the point there that you still develop that relationship with that person, and for that person then to tell you a lie of that magnitude. You know, it really doesn't say very much about the system.
I tell you what, I was not expecting to be approaching the 11 o'clock, mounting a sort of defence of the journalists at the heart of this story, but that's the beauty of a radio phone, and that is where I've ended up, in good faith, because I've got enormous problems with what happened yesterday, but I don't have an answer to the question that you don't have an answer to either. What else can they do?
Yeah, well, I'm sorry, I don't have an answer.
No harm done, Andrew. All is good. I've checked the provenance of this account. It is the Ian Dale, as the blue tick attests. I listened to Mr. James O.B.'s opening monologue about the Boris Leeds Jack Punch fake news stuff this morning. I'd love not to have to say this, but I agreed with virtually every word. A very dark day for media reporting and political honesty. Ian and I are on slightly different sides of many, if not all, political arguments, but as we talked about on the day that Boris Johnson didn't say people of colour, do you remember that? That little, it happened live on air. I was about to start reporting it because at Channel 4, again, just like yesterday, Channel 4 had reported that Boris Johnson said people of colour when he was talking about democratically controlling the ingress and egress of human beings from the United Kingdom, to and from the United Kingdom. And because Channel 4 had reported it, my antennae told me that, oh, well, that'll be kosher then. And then I saw one objection, just one little objection on social media saying it sounds a bit like talent to me. So we did something that we'll get the chance to do once every 10 years. We together listened to it live and arrived at a conclusion. And the conclusion was one that Boris Johnson's detractors wouldn't have wanted it to be. It was a conclusion that Boris Johnson's fans would have wanted it to be. And without declaring any particular interest in that division, that divide, the truth was that he said talent, not colour. The truth. It was a really helpful key to unlock this question, temporarily. What are you? Are you 100% pro or 100% against this individual? No, you can't be. As Ian Dale just proves in that tweet, the truth is what matters. And the truth is, something really bad happened yesterday, and I don't know how to fix it. Thankfully, it's not my job. On this occasion, my job is to ask the questions. If you want some suggestions as to how to fix it, How to Be Right in a World Gone Wrong is still available in all good bookshops. Alan is in Birmingham. Alan, what would you like to say?
Well, yeah, I've rang up just to reassure you that what you're doing, for me at least, is working.
Drop in the ocean. Drop in the ocean, Alan.
Last night, not long after news at 10, I'd on my WhatsApp come through that fake news about the child on the trolley.
Yes.
And normally I would have thought to myself, you know, I'd have accepted that. But because I listened to your programme, and I've been listening now for about 6-7 months, I'm retired, so I can listen to you most days. The first thing I thought of was that's fake news. Now, when I woke up this morning, and I went to bed last night, and that was on my mind, thinking, well, that's not good. The first thing I looked at was Facebook this morning, and there it is all over Facebook on my news feed.
Yeah.
So
unchallenged, unquestioned.
Unchallenged. I reposted it, and I've put, you know, this is fake news, obviously fake news. This is what, you know, what they get up to. And since then, a few of my friends have responded. So, you know, one of them has said, well, why hasn't the hospital said anything? And because I listened to you this morning, and you've mentioned that the hospital have actually apologised to the mother.
Before the lies went live, the hospital. I mean, the Yorkshire Evening Post have done a bang-up job on this. The journalist responsible, who's, I'll tell you his name, Daniel Sheridan, and his boss, James Mitchinson, have double-sourced everything they've done, and the apology from the hospital was front and centre. So this is an appalling abuse of democracy.
Yeah. Why wouldn't they put it on television tonight to say that it was fake news?
I don't know. I never went up that ladder.
That's what needs to be done, you know, because last night I was watching Newsnight, and what something else on Newsnight, Emily made this. There was the guy, someone from Labour.
Barry Gardner.
And she asked him the question, how many hospitals has Jeremy Corbyn visited? Well, the first thing that popped into my head is why does Jeremy Corbyn need to visit hospitals?
I haven't got the context of why that question was asked. The answer probably lay in what happened in the previous 5 minutes of the programme. But equally, I mean, you know, everyone's got questions to answer. The question that we can't answer, and this is a really scary thing because, well, for two reasons. It's scary that we can't answer it because it's so important, but it's also really scary that this is quite a deliberate calculation, and the calculation is there are millions and millions and millions of people who like being lied to or who don't care when it's been shown that they're being lied to. And I don't get it, and Alan, I don't understand why they don't care. I thought everybody hated being lied to.
Yeah, I agree with you. But keep doing what you're doing, Jan.
Well, you've got to help me out, pal. It's all very well. You've got to get on your Facebook and start picking off these people, picking off your Auntie Doris and all her mates one by one.
I'm annoying some friends, but I'm getting some ridiculous comments made back to me.
And that is so fascinating. No, I hear you. And some ridiculous comments coming back to you. He's annoying his friends by telling them the truth. Don't tell us the truth, Alan. We're getting told some really, really lovely lies. We're getting told some lovely, lovely, warming, comforting lies. The NHS is great. 4-year-old kids aren't lying on coats on the floor. Everything is wonderful, and Brexit's going to be an absolute blast. Annoying your friends now by telling the truth. This is what they've done to us. And still people insist. I mean, I understand the people who get paid to do it. I understand why they are doing what they're doing, whether they realise it or not. You know, it's Stockholm Syndrome. You've been doing it for so long, you just cash the cheques and you stopped asking questions years ago. But for the people being lied to, why are you so comfortable with it? Answer, snowflakes or something about vegan, I don't know, gender-neutral sausage. Why do you like being lied to? Is it Marxism or something? Why do you like being lied to? It's political correctness gone mad. The truth is... Seriously, what have you got? And it's one of those days that America went through 2 or 3 years ago. When did Kellyanne Conway first start talking about alternative facts? And they started banning people from White House press briefings. And we, because we do things in a slightly more measured or mannered way, don't realise that we're on exactly the same path in so many ways. Banning journalists from the campaign bus, in this case the Daily Mirror. I presume that Labour have got similar issues, although, for the record, off the top of my head, I can't think of any. Jeremy Corbyn won't be interviewed by anybody on LBC, but that's not quite the same as banning us from Labour Party events. It's still pretty poor, in my view. But the White House press briefings, the failure to find the ways in which you can hold a president to account when the tally of untruths that he has told is in the tens of thousands. Journalism doesn't have a gear in a proper democracy. It doesn't have a gear to deal with lies coming from high. lies from on high. In the most obvious case, the White House, the president himself. We don't have the gear. We've got the gear to deal with someone who gets his spad to read him a report so that he can turn up on the radio and claim that he hasn't actually read the report, but he's got enough knowledge of it in order to defend any googlies that might be thrown his way. That is, if you like, a true untruth or something, if you see what I mean. But we haven't got the gear. I'm all right, because I can just sit here and call it out, whoever's doing it. I can call out the anti-Semitism, I can call out the dishonesty, I can call out the deceptions, it's fine. But I don't need these people to do my job. I don't need to get Boris Johnson into the studio or Jeremy Corbyn or any of them in order to keep my livelihood. Most people in this line of work ultimately do. So when the gatekeepers start lying to you, what do you do? Answer, looking at how some people have chosen to deal with it, completely ignore it, pretend it's not happening at all. Pay it no lip service whatsoever. Nothing to see here. Let's have a conversation about gender-neutral vegan rolls instead. That's option number one. Option number two, an apology, a withdrawal. Labour says that the Conservatives are reduced to barefaced lying, says a journalist who has been lied to in a barefaced fashion. It's not enough. But what is? I don't know. But this is really big. This is a pendulum moment. A pendulum moment. And, of course, half the country will claim that it isn't. But that's the same half of the country that's claiming a social media lie from an account that's now being deleted is true. And it's not just your Auntie Doris on Facebook, it's the Daily Telegraph columnist Alison Pearson and similar journalists of a similar stature. How do you fix it? Dan's in Leicester. Dan, what would you like to say?
Hello, mate. It used to be years ago when the news cycle was more predictable in terms of turnaround and space was finite, that people like political sources, such as they are, had to vie with journalists in order to get their message out, and the power really lay with the journalists. But now the space is infinite, and the news cycle is constant and incessant. The power shift has been flipped 180, so all the power now lies with the source, because the journalist has this massive...
Are you sure? I'm not old enough to... This is another one of those days when I wish my dad was still alive so I could just ask him whether it was always this crazy. But the political editor of the Times would still be biting chunks out of the political editor of the Telegraph in order to get that line from that politician or that advisor, wouldn't they?
Oh no, what I mean is regardless of journalist v journalist, they all need to be out of the blocks. They all need to be on the story. They need the clicks. They need the eyeballs. And this is because they've kind of failed to come up with a working business model since the internet came along. And
it's not just 24-hour news. It's the fact that so many of us are very prominent on social media as well, and if people are following you on social media to be kept up to date with developments rather than for your red-hot takes on the big issues of the day, then that pressure is unimaginable unless you're actually enduring it.
Exactly. So journalistic integrity kind of goes out the window in the quest for clicks and eyeballs.
Don't throw that one in so casually. Journalist integrity doesn't go out the window.
Not universally, of course, but not universally. Definitely not universally. Okay. But the two main sources who put that story out yesterday are under constant pressure to be first out of the blocks on this stuff. I can almost feel my phone vibrate when something happens.
Yes.
As the various news outlets try to be first on my home screen.
Yes.
And there's that pressure to be there first, to be there with the story, and it's almost regardless of the veracity of the story. But that's not about the
journalist, Dan. This is where I'm conscious that maybe I'm peddling too hard to protect erstwhile colleagues and friends and what have you. But that's not the journalist, that's the provenance. So journalists could trust the provenance, even if it was questionable in its entirety. And I go back to the, having the report read to me in the back of the car so that I can tell a journalist I haven't read it and still be somehow telling the truth, even though somehow I'm also not. You could trust the provenance. Senior Conservative source, senior Labour source would mean, well, this will be true.
Yeah, the reason you could trust the provenance, though, is because the news cycle was such that there was time for triple sourcing or whatever whatever journalists, whatever.
Well, I saw some claims that this had been double-sourced yesterday, but I haven't got enough to comment further.
No, but
the speed, the pressure of getting something out there before the other lot do. So if you were the political editor of JOB and you knew that your source was almost certainly speaking to the political editor of BBC and ITV, you'd think, right, we're going to go with it, because otherwise they'll beat us to the jump.
Exactly, be first. Well, imagine if they hadn't gone with the story before they triple-sourced it. They would have been last out of the blocks before first.
But then an hour later, he who laughs last laughs longest, you know?
Well, you get
Take it from me.
But you get the traffic on the retraction as well.
Yeah, well, that's not fair. I mean, your average hack is not counting clicks more than they're counting truths, but the central point about the pressure and the speed of turnaround is probably a big part of it. So what do you do then? Come on. What do you do then, clever clogs? And actually, just Sam in Redhill texts as you speak, don't be first, be right, which I think I'll adopt as a new motto.
Well,
but what would you do?
And right is usually best, right?
Yeah, well, that's if you've got to choose between two, be right, don't be first.
I think I think there has to be some sort of solidarity within journalistic circles. Like, for example, when Donald Trump started messing about with who was allowed to do what in daily press briefings, there was no sense of solidarity.
Yeah, that's
when
the problem.
Started calling out individual journalists.
Yeah.
I think it's a concerted effort on the part of journalism as a whole to say, you know, down with this sort of thing. It's not going to happen.
It's down with this sort of thing.
Exactly.
I can't see it happening because, you know, if Theo Usherwood said, right, well, in solidarity with my colleagues, I'm turning down that exclusive I've just been offered with Boris Johnson, Jeremy Corbyn, you know, he'd be marched out of the building.
Well, you know, remember when Donald Trump said to, was it a BBC guy? He said, I'm not talking to you, you are fake news.
John Sopel.
Now, for my money, every journalist in that room should have got up and walked out at that point. I think that was a real watershed moment because they didn't. They said, OK, he's been called fake. A guy from a really reputable news outlet has been called fake news. We're not going to do anything about that.
And then what happens?
All this.
No. Then what happens if all the journalists get up and march out? What happens then? At the far right websites that are still in the room, they get an unchecked tilt at amplifying further fake news, real fake news, genuinely fake news, to coin a phrase.
Yeah, I run out of answers to that.
Well, that's where I run out of answers. And when you remember that some of these far right websites are on the payroll of or contributors, editors of some of these far-right websites are on the payroll of magazines like The Spectator, which is published by a man, or at least the company is chaired by a man who is a scrupulously impartial BBC politics presenter, you begin to see just how many complications there are in calling for any sort of solidarity or any sort of collective action. You're paying Breitbart editors, paying them to write articles for your magazine. Where is the journalistic solidarity going to come from? Tom's in Letchworth. Tom, what would you like to say?
Hiya, James. Basically, I mean, I think we've got to a point now where surely any political journalist or anyone worth their salt is not just taking information from political party as rote. You know, you're investigating and challenging that information. Well, they're not, obviously shown yesterday, but you should be investigating and challenging that information.
I wonder whether Dan and you cancel each other out, because you're right in an ideal world, but I can't. I haven't got time. Someone else is going to tweet it by tea time, so I've got to get in there first.
I'm not sure that's the point, because as we saw yesterday with these climb downs. But what has been interesting is that this is
the source should be sacked. The source should be sacked.
Well,
by their employer.
The journalists should be resigning, you know, especially surely those journalists that are working for impartial media organisations who have been given these sources by whichever political party, in this case the Conservatives, and are just spewing it out on their Twitter.
Because until very recently, the provenance was actually kosher. You could trust a certain status, a certain level of contact, and if someone phoned you up with that, and they fitted under the category senior Labour source or senior Conservative source, it's not, I'll let you into a little secret, it's not when I wrote stories 20 years ago, which had come from a, quote, showbiz insider. In the case of senior Conservative sources and senior Labour sources, these people actually exist, and the provenance was trustworthy, and suddenly it isn't. So it's not fair to expect us or them to have all the answers immediately, because this only just broke.
But surely this isn't the first time where senior... source?
I think it is. I can't... no, I'm sure it isn't. But off the top of my head, a bloke got punched. Here's some footage of him not being punched. I've never seen it in such stark terms.
Well, yeah, I mean, I agree with you, but surely... If you're a journalist, your first instinct should be, especially after I will put my cards on the table here. Yes. I'm a Labour Party member.
Okay, don't say any more than that. I don't want to know any more than that about, with constituency issues and what have you.
No, that's absolutely fine. But surely after a morning where Boris Johnson is in the news for stealing a reporter's phone and not looking at something, and then
really steal it, did he? He gave pocketing. You can have pocketing, but he gave the phone back. Pocketing. So stealing would be rather hard to prove in a court of law.
Okay,
so come on,
I'll go with pocketing then. And then a senior Conservative source comes forward and says, "Oh, by the way, one of Matt Hancock's gone to a hospital and one of his aides has been punched." Maybe that's just me, but my warning bells would be going off immediately. But away from that, if you don't mind, I might take it off just slightly off tangent, because you asked earlier.
Well, I'm out of time actually, so say it in a sentence. Say it in a sentence if you can, Tom. Sorry to.
Why we like being lied to?
Yes.
And I think the reason is down to our education system, because in our education system, when you're a kid, you're sat in rows with your mates, and a big authority figure at the top of the class tells you, these are the facts. I am right. You write this down in your book. So we're socially conditioned to believe people in power. We're socially conditioned to believe the PM. We're socially conditioned to believe, newspapers who have these access. So when you're lied to by these papers, when these papers are,
you just don't question
putting out untruths, and when the PM
is that forelock? Are we talking about forelock tugging? We're talking about deference. I have chosen to throw my lot in with this person who is highborn, and therefore I am not going to challenge anything that they tell me. Doff cap tug forelock.
I don't think it's deference.
What is it then?
Highborn. I think it's people. It's people because of the way that we're educated, we innately trust people in positions of power. Now, it doesn't matter whether they're highborn. We could have a working class,
and that is why
because they're the PM. You're trusting them. So
that's why people in positions of authority who turn out to be abusers manage so often to stay secret, because there is an almost tribal reluctance to believe that a priest or a professor could be doing something so awful because of the way our society is structured, even beyond school.
Right, and I think the second thing with that is that we also don't like being wrong. And as a people, I mean, no one likes being wrong, and we've seen that with the EU referendum, that people on one side go, well,
no, they don't like being wrong. They don't like admitting they're wrong. It's slightly different.
Okay, but by now, if you've been told something, if you've seen it, and you've on Twitter and you've gone to all your mates, oh, did you see that Matt Hancock's aide got punched, or this or that or the other? Yeah. The last thing you want to say is, oh, sorry guys, I was completely wrong. In fact,
and you're right, and that probably describes almost everybody. And yet. How much effort do you have to put into denying the evidence of your eyes and ears? And Tom reminds me of a line that we haven't actually shared on the programme for a while, despite the fact that at one point we were sharing it several times a day. A lie is halfway around the world before the truth has got its trousers on. And one of the political correspondents at the centre of this story, I'll never forget, I did a thing, I can't really tell you much about it because Chatham House rule applied, but I explained about 3 years ago to a collection of very senior journalists, household name journalists, what was going to happen if they didn't start calling lies lies and liars liars. And it's now happening. And I'll never forget the look on the face of one of the assembled journalists. I'm perfectly comfortable being sneered at, but there was a look of such sort of derision almost, as if, who does this jumped-up talk show host think he's addressing today? We will not take lectures from the likes of him. It was shortly after I'd had to very, very, very reluctantly withdraw my services from presenting BBC programmes in order to retain my ability to tell you that you're being lied to, rather than to say, and here's, on the other hand, someone who claims that lie is not a lie, in the interests of balance. Almost every step of this path has been plotted quite perfectly by a number of people, right up to and including the point where the two political editors of the two major broadcasters publish lies that they have been told by a, quote, senior conservative source. And we're all supposed to just calm down, accept the apology and carry on, which is fine, because they're good journalists, sneering fizzogs notwithstanding. But we can't, because what have we learnt from Brexit? If you let the liars triumph, they'll just start lying all over again about something new. They don't suddenly stop, you know? People who reported the 350 million quid on the side of the bus with a straight face. Oh, well, I'm really sorry. I probably should have done some sums on that or tried a bit harder to find out what the real truth was. Too late, mate. Too late. It's gone. It's gone halfway around the world. It's all over Alan's mate's Facebook. Oh, well, I'm terribly sorry. We should... No, not good enough. You've got to change the game. You've got to find a new gear. Otherwise, it's America. That is literally what happened. And speaking of America, and in the interests of accuracy, I'm going to take Aaron's word for this. I haven't double-checked, but I can think of no reason why he'd yank my chain. He goes, I love your show and the work you do, and not to be pedantic, but just in the interest of accuracy, Trump actually called Jim Acosta of CNN fake news. He called John Sopel another beauty in reference to the BBC, and I Am Incorrigible goes further. When Jim Acosta, was banned from the White House press pool by Trump, for no reason, no other journalists walked out or refused to participate in press briefings. To which, again, I'd respond by saying, well, if they had, who'd have stayed? Fox News and some of these weird neo-fascist websites that are so fond of Donald Trump. They'd be the only ones left in the room. I've even been asked myself about the company I'm compelled to keep. But there's no mystery or shame in simply saying this is a magnificent platform from which to speak truth to power. A magnificent platform. I don't get to control, and nor would I want to control who else gets access to it, but I get access to you, which is the most precious thing. And so I get it, and I can see the attraction. Well, everyone should just get up and walk out. But I don't know if it would work, and it could conceivably make the situation worse. 25 minutes after 11. Cyrus is in Hounslow. Cyrus, what would you like to say?
I wanted to talk about that kind of collective bargaining, that kind of journalists all coming together and walking out of the room. Because I think that is a very powerful point in this country in particular, because BBC and ITV make up the vast majority of broadcast media in terms of, like, the eyeballs. Who sees it? Besides them and Channel 4, that kind of makes up the entire thing. In America, there's such a diversity of broadcast media. I feel like they have... It's an entirely different kettle of fish.
What do you mean? What do you mean? I'm not an expert on American media, so...
As in, like, if I look at this country and I look at what are people watching in this country, I think if you got BBC, ITV and Channel 4 together, you've got the vast majority of all broadcast news, all just in those three news outlets. Whereas in the United States, if I just remove MSNBC, CNN, you've still got so many others, whether it be Breitbart, whether it be Fox News.
But they're all in Britain as well.
They are in Britain as well, but they don't have the same power at that.
I don't think you spend enough time on right-wing Facebook.
They do have influence, especially when you look at social media and their, like...
Okay, well, let's park that, the imbalance in scope and reach. But where were you going? What was the solution to this problem that you were going to suggest?
I think it's fair for BBC and ITV to kind of call out their source in this case, the source that has actively lied to them, because it seems to be a similar story was told to both. And also, I think it's fair for them to review the way they put out the evidence that this source gives them. So, like, when I was reading their tweets yesterday around this issue, because I was I was on Twitter all the day, they didn't point them out as allegations or accusations. They point out that this is criminal activity they're talking about, but they pointed them out as if they were already fact.
But, you know, there was one Daily Telegraph journalist claimed that someone had been arrested.
Yeah. It's just... like,
but I'm not interested in them, really.
Not really.
That's different from the national broadcasters. But again, I go back to provenance, and the provenance used to be trustworthy. You could say that job description meant they wouldn't tell you a barefaced lie. You might have to sniff around a bit to see what they were not telling you or what they were covering up, but they wouldn't. A man got punched when a man didn't get punched. That's not nuance, that's not spin, that's not open to interpretation, and I genuinely don't think it's the fault of the two political editors to have done that. I think if they don't change something now, then it is time for a blame game, and I worry that because we don't know what they should do differently. How the hell can we get cross with them for not knowing what they should do differently? But something massive has changed, and yet by this time tomorrow, there's every possibility no one will be acknowledging that. We'll be back to the sort of weirdness.
I think I still think they do have some power in this particular circumstance.
What would you do then? What would you do? Briefly.
What I do?
Yeah.
I think you have to recognise that this is the Conservative Party that was advised by Dominic Cummings, someone who's held in contempt of Parliament, someone who has been part of groups that have breached electoral law. So you can't report what they say as truth. You have to actively say that this is being portrayed by a person that has been known to lie, or by a group which has been known to lie or associates itself with liars. And I think they need to be more forward in coming out and just saying, like, I want them to call out their source, really. I think they need to call out their source.
I agree, but I don't think they will. I don't think they will, because you know, regardless of what happens on Thursday, there is a possibility that the people that they would be preparing to publicly shame are going to be exercising enormous power for a very long amount of time. And how can Boris Johnson, who conspired to have a journalist beaten up, how can he be responsible for disciplining someone who merely lied to a journalist? And what would you say if your boss tried to fire you for telling me a lie and you knew that your boss had actually conspired to have my head kicked in?
Yeah, it's part of like the whole corrupt system currently within the Conservative
Party. It's corrupt. I mean, it's a big word, corrupt. I don't know if I'd reach for it personally. I think it's the barefacedness of it all that I find incredible. I just leave that question hanging.
Yeah.
How could you be reasonably disciplined by your boss for lying to a journalist if your boss was on the record conspiring with a now convicted criminal to get a journalist's head kicked in?
I think the media need to hold. I've
got to go to the news. You've spoiled my theatrical moment. You weren't supposed to respond to that. It was a rhetorical question, Cyrus. What a strange old business, eh? Seriously, and the number of people still furiously insisting that they like being lied to, or just repeating the lies they've been told. And what do you do? I mean, I know the Orwell line is in danger of being very overused on this programme. The party told you to not to trust the evidence of your eyes and ears. But what do you do when you're there, when you find yourself saying, well, that O'Brien bloke on the radio, I'll show him. Here's the lie. I'm going to pretend it's true. That'll teach him a lesson. How have they done that to you? How have they done that to you? How have you ended up hating on the people that are looking after you and cheering for the people that are lying to you? It's quite bizarre. 11:34 is the time. Editor of the Yorkshire Post on the way to talk us through the genesis of this remarkable story and its even more remarkable unfolding postscript. And here's the thing. Maybe we've messed up. Maybe we've done that thing I told you I was worried increasingly about on Monday morning. Every show, every morning you find yourself thinking, is this what they want us to do? Whoever it may be, whatever party, whatever political shenanigans may be underway, should we still be talking about the little boy? Should we be talking about the fact that nobody punched Matt Hancock's aide? Should we be talking about the fact that the Prime Minister, rather than look at a photograph of an event for which a hospital had apologised on the phone of an ITV journalist, the Prime Minister elected to put the phone in his pocket before some sort of shame kicked in after it was pointed out to him by said journalist that he'd put said phone in said pocket. He pulled it out again and offered finally an apology to everybody who's had a bad experience in the NHS. And then, as if Leeds hadn't suffered enough, he sent Matt Hancock north to try and put the fire out, culminating in the most senior political journalists in the land publishing lies about Matt Hancock's aide being punched. And it went further. I don't know how orchestrated it is, but how does a Daily Telegraph journalist end up tweeting that someone has been arrested? Where did that come from? Problems. Problems, problems. I saw a brilliant tweet this morning by Barney Farmer, who you'll know as the Viz contributor. Him and his cartoonist mate Lee Healy do some of the most powerful social commentary you'll see anywhere, and I mean that. Check it out. And he made the point about the distinction between national journalism and regional journalism, because national journalists are the ones at fault today. Regional journalism, Joe Pike was working for Yorkshire ITV when he questioned the Prime Minister in such a beautifully simple way, and the original story of the little boy on the floor was broken by the Yorkshire Evening News, which falls under the auspices of James Mitchinson, editor of the Yorkshire Post, but also the sort of Lord High Panjandrum of a whole stable of newspapers, of which the Yorkshire Evening News is one of them. And James joins me on the line now, because I wanted to talk to you, James, about this email that you have sent to a reader. So let's begin with what was said in the email you received, if we may.
Good morning, James.
Hello.
So if I can summarise quickly what was said from clearly a reader who understands the Yorkshire Post, because a lady who I shall refer to as Margaret without revealing her surname, she told me she takes the Yorkshire Post. She always has taken the Yorkshire Post. But she provided for my information a screen grab of the Facebook post that suggested by a lady called Cherie, whose account's now been deleted.
And we think this is the beginning, do we? We think this is the source of the lie.
Do you know, I wouldn't...
No.
We live in such times, James.
But it was Margaret's source, at least.
It was amongst those first off the line, let's put it that way. And Margaret had screen grabbed it for me and said, look, there's a lady here who has a good friend, and the wording was very carefully crafted. This lady has a good friend who works at Leeds General Infirmary who says this simply isn't true. And that was that. And the payoff to the email was, I'll no longer be taking the Yorkshire Post because you don't check your facts.
Yep. So she's taking a presumably unknown Facebook account ahead of you, but I like your sympathy. I like the way that your understanding of the psychological processes that could have led her to do so.
Yeah, I do, and whatever compels CCHQ to pretend to be a fact-checking service, whatever compels those who edited the Keir Starmer video, whatever compels those to suggest Matt Hancock's been punched, is not nearly as scary to me as the impact it's having on the Margarets of this world.
Your readers.
They're disposing of... You know, I look after, as editorial director for JPI Media Yorkshire, I look after over 100 journalists who are brilliant, who are studious, who are trained, who live in Yorkshire, who care about the county. And their professionalism, their work is being undermined and disregarded by the Margarets of this world in favour of Facebook and Twitter posts by the Cheries of this world, because they're crafted in such gloriously emotive language. It resonates with people. And, you know, I think we've had such sustained exposure to this fake news world that people are now looking for Disney World, I think is how I'd put it. They're looking for somewhere where they can walk through the gates and not see or hear anything that upsets them.
Or even simply challenges their...
challenges their perspective.
Their perspectives on things. It is a weird... I mean, you're arguably even closer to it than I am, but it is one of the weirdest things. So what did you do? Tell me how you replied to Margaret.
First of all, I responded by thanking Margaret for her note overnight. And I responded sympathetically and empathetically because she's a victim. You know, I think the Margarets of this world shouldn't be expected to be able to spot and identify bot accounts in the same way you and I might be able to. And there's a deep requirement for. I mean, I'm going to make myself sound like overdramatic and hysterical, but
I don't think you are.
I do think the British society. Our democracy is in peril at the moment, and I put a tweet out this morning saying trust is in a tangle with evil and evil's winning, and I'm starting to get sadly increasingly depressed, but more and more energised to try to fight back.
Well, I guess you have to, don't you? So just run us through the 5-point answer that you provided to Margaret, if you would, James.
So I advised Margaret, I apologised for having to do this and hoped I wasn't patronising, but I said to her, the story was first published by the Yorkshire Evening Post after the mother, Sarah, contacted us directly.
My apologies for calling it the Yorkshire Evening News, so that's the first fact check that we'll get. Just carry on.
The second point was that I said, because it's irresponsible and reckless even to take one person's word as fact and immediately publish a story, we checked the veracity of the assertion with the hospital. I had there, the addendum is, that's not a boast, by the way, it's just bog standard journalism. That's the lowest the bar should be set for.
Printing it without putting in some cause to check whether it was true or not, which is, of course, exactly what you can do on Facebook, which you can't do as the editor-in-chief of the Yorkshire Evening Post.
That's right, yeah. I go on to say that the hospital confirmed the set of circumstances that you read in our story were and are and remain correct. The Chief Medical Officer for Leeds Teaching Hospital, as Dr. Yvette Ode, accepted the situation had occurred and offered an explanation as to why. And the principal reason, without going over too much of the explanation, was that they were simply overrun. Yeah. The demand for help outstripped capacity. The doctors and nurses there quite simply didn't have the hands to tend to all the patients. The chief executive, as opposed to the chief medical officer, Julian Hartley, went on to confirm this had taken place, and he offered a personal apology to Sarah and Jack. Whilst backing the staff at LGI, quite rightly so as well, they work hard and they care. And that was the 5-point response I offered to her in the first instance.
And of course, all of this was on the record before you went to press.
Yep, and you can go now. So in the last few moments, the Trust has released full details of the statement that they gave to us. It's on their website now.
Yeah. But protect the Christian West with his bulldog avatar. He knows better than the chief executive of the trust, than the chief medical officer for all Leeds teaching hospitals, than the mother of the little boy concerned. Bobbing Ongar with his pictures of crusaders on his Twitter account is, I mean, they set themselves up as rivals to these people.
There's a common theme with some of the some people call them sock puppets, some people call them bots, but they're putting letters after their name. You'll notice QC, Esquire.
I got confused about that the other day. So someone explained it to me. It was that Godfrey Bloom creature who put QC. This is to undermine people who actually are QC.
I think it's in order to bestow upon themselves a superior status to we mere mortals.
Maybe, yeah. While simultaneously deriding experts. It's a curious place that we find ourselves.
So undermining the establishment whilst playing a pipe for people to follow their tune. Really, really worrying. But yeah, the real worrying thing was the amount of traffic that my account started to attract last night by anonymous accounts with, at 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 5 as account names. It was absolutely terrifying.
Some of them are real. You've got no way of knowing which, but the sheer volume of identically phrased tweets from a myriad of accounts is clearly not a coincidence, and that is why Margaret ends up just presuming there wouldn't be so much of it if it wasn't true. And you explain to her why she's in this case mistaken. You go on. And it's a really measured, I don't know whether you've been on a course, James, but it's a really beautifully measured email to your reader. So, as you can see, we went to great lengths to establish the story was true and to check that the hospital accepted as much. I do not blame you for contacting me as you have done. You're not the only ones who have seen the Cherie Jenner Hepburn Facebook post. Again, that account has now been deleted. Amongst thousands of others very similar in nature and believed it to be true, what we are dealing with is quite simply a very poorly little boy in a place that cannot give him the care he needs, and as a result a mother reaching out for help. They are the ones that really matter here. And then you do a 4-point account as to perhaps how she could avoid being similarly misled in the future. Just run us through that, if you would.
Okay, bear in mind I have to be careful because I don't really know who's on the other end. It could be somebody who's really tech savvy, it could be somebody who is But
someone not acting in good faith in their original complaint to you.
Indeed,
yes,
indeed. The nugget of the line that suggested she took the Saturday edition, which is our best edition, reassured me somewhat. But anyway, the first one was, that account has now disappeared. Our accounts are still here, and you can hold me and my journalists to account. 2, you have no way of holding Cherie to account, nor checking her words. She's a stranger to you. You don't even know if it is a real person. So why do you trust her claim over the newspaper you've taken for years in good faith? Cherie, robot or human, did not offer a credible source. The words were, a good friend of mine. They add warmth and humanity to the post in order to dupe others into believing her words credible. They're almost hypnotic, if you like, with the humanity that are in there. They are not, as far as anyone can tell. I attached below a screen grab of multiple accounts who also claim to have a good friend at LGI.
Even though they didn't call it LGI, actually, just by way of...
It's Leeds Hospital.
Yes, it's Leeds Hospital, which doesn't exist. It would be like calling St Thomas's London Hospital.
London Hospital, yeah, London Central Hospital, yeah, something like that. It simply isn't credible or true, and again, the words are manufactured very carefully and cynically in order to mislead. I also attached for her interest several accounts claiming to be a former paediatric nurse. The accounts are all, well, I think the accounts are fakes, that's my view. All make the same claim using the same wording, copy and pasted.
And there it is. I mean, the 2 questions. Have you heard back from Margaret?
I have.
And?
Yep, I have heard back from Margaret. She was quite contrite. She was grateful for the response.
That's why we come to work every morning, isn't it? And the second question is, here's the problem, and I don't know whether you'll want to comment on this. Our accounts are still here, and you can hold me and my journalists to account. Well, we know that at least one Daily Telegraph columnist and one prominent broadcaster have actually repeated this completely false claim. And, of course, they haven't been deleted.
No, that's the worry, isn't it? Quite how we put the genie back in the bottle, I don't know. So let me give you another example. I've been whinging on, as is my prerogative, about these fake newspapers that the political parties have been using.
Indeed you have, yes. And that's all political parties. I think you focus more, perhaps, on the Liberal Democrats than the 2 main parties. I've been following it. I
did, quite simply because they were the ones that said free newspaper on the front.
Right.
And, yeah, there was more of it. But my point is, those newspapers get pushed through God knows how many letterboxes, hundreds of thousands, perhaps millions, with the free newspaper strap on the front, with messaging that's essentially party political broadcasts. They are duping those people who receive those leaflets into thinking they're newspapers.
Yes.
If I'd done that, I'd have to apologise and retract in exactly the same space. Whereas nobody goes around putting another newspaper through those people's letterboxes saying, actually, you might want to be aware that those Pradas, those party political broadcasts weren't used at all.
Prune, not Prada. You can
Prada.
Pravda.
Pradas.
Got a Prada in Leeds now.
Well, nobody follows it up, do they?
No, they don't. They don't. Well, you do, and I sense. I hope you don't. I hope I'm wrong on this, but I sense that you're feeling quite dispirited at the moment, despite the fact that your lad delivered the scoop of the week, and the follow-up as arguably, or in an ideal universe, would have seen that scoop assume even more capital. But you are instead firefighting the people trying to undermine objective truth.
Yeah, I think I have to spend, so my team has to spend as little time as possible firefighting and as much time as possible doing what they do best, and that is the trusted journalism that I think people are looking for.
Well, there's a reason why Jack's mum came to your paper in the first place.
Indeed.
Final question, and again, you might not be able to answer it, let alone want to. What would you do if you were the political editor of a major news broadcaster and you had been told a fib by a senior Conservative source, which you had then published on your social media in good faith?
That's a very good question.
You don't have to answer it. I can't.
Well, for starters, I'd be going back to the source to give them a kick in the proverbials, that's for sure.
Well, then you run the risk of losing access. As you know, James, I'm incredibly late for the break, which I hope you'll take as a compliment to the quality of your contribution. James Mitchelson.
Thank you for the time.
No, well, any time. You know that. Crikey. Talked yesterday about the London bubble, but the more journalists we can get on the programme from up and down these islands, the better for all of my listeners, that would be. We will take this up to the wire. I don't think... I mean, I enjoyed James Mitchinson's suggestion that if he'd been sold a pup by a senior Conservative or indeed a senior Labour or a senior Lib Dem source on the scale that the political editors of the BBC and ITV were yesterday, then he'd give his source a kick in the proverbials. I shall avoid all Yorkshire-related cliches at this point and simply remind you that that would be my gut reaction as well. But what happens next week when you need access? It's a tricky one. And I'm so grateful to you for the quality of the calls today, because it is like a very in-house. It's very in, but it's not at the same time. Journalism is all we've got. It's all we've got to hold truth to power. Seriously, even our votes aren't as powerful as journalism. I know that sounds odd, but if the journalism is lying to you and you cast a vote as a result of the lies, that's not democracy. That's a manufactured autocracy. Democracy demands honest journalism. It absolutely needs it, and the less honest journalist gets, the less democratic a society becomes. Or the more a politician accuses journalists who are telling the truth of not telling the truth, the further from proper accountable democracy we sail, which leads us inevitably, inexorably, heartbreakingly back to the White House, of course, and the assault upon objective truth undertaken by Donald Trump, which even those of us who worried from very, very early on about echoes on the other side of the Atlantic, or on this side of the Atlantic, of what was happening on the other side, would still really have poo-pooed some of the stronger comparisons and parallels. I wonder whether you feel you can still poo-poo them today. So a couple more calls, and then I promise you something completely different. But with that caveat hanging over us, what happens now? What do these people do, given that they have essentially been set up as public patsies by senior sources? What do? I've got a horrible feeling they have no choice but just to carry on as normal and hope that they won't get lied to again, as The Who almost sang. Nick's in Fareham. Nick, what would you like to say?
Hi, morning, James. On that very point, what do they do?
Yeah.
This is a pivotal moment. It's 2 days before probably the most important election in my lifetime. The bonnet has been opened. We can see underneath it.
Well, you can. There's plenty of people swearing blind. That's not a bonnet, mate.
Well, they've got to call it out. They have to call it out, exactly as you've done. There's a 4-year-old boy with pneumonia on the floor of A&E. There's no beds. NHS a breaking point.
Yeah, well, that's what the hospital said. That's what the hospital said. Protect the Christian West knows better, and he's got a bulldog avatar, so you should really be listening to him, not the actual NHS on this occasion.
No, well, I want to listen to the BBC and ITV political editors call this out for what it is. We can see it for what it is. You and I can see it for what it is.
Let's not conflate the two stories. The lie that they were told by a senior Conservative source was about Matt Hancock being punched. You can, and I would agree with you, argue that lie was designed to distract from the veracity, the reality of the story of the boy on the floor, and now there's a whole bunch of new lies that James Mitchinson just talked us through, coming from various corners of social media, but being picked up by prominent, well-paid journalists that talk about the untrustworthiness of the original story.
Yeah, so they lay that out, James. They lay that whole narrative out, what has happened, exactly as you have just done.
It took me half an hour. They wouldn't be able to do that on the News at 10 Bulletin. They'd only get about 3 minutes.
Well, you did it in 30 seconds to a minute. I don't see why they wouldn't be able to do it. These are two of the most important people, the most important journalists in the country.
It's all we've got.
If they don't call it out now, when are they going to call it out? We've got good, decent MPs who have fallen on their swords over this. Dominic Grieve, he's fighting for his seat.
Careful, nothing constituency specific. You haven't mentioned where he's standing, but you can find a full list of all the candidates on our website, I'm sure. Carry on, Nick, briefly.
There are other MPs who are either being denied their voice or who will be by a corrupt election. We've got civil servants who have values of honesty, integrity, impartiality, objectivity. There's a US diplomat fallen on her sword at the weekend because she can't peddle half-truths anymore.
Yes.
Surely the BBC
and the ITV, political editors, public service broadcasters, will have more impact than even the MPs and the US diplomats. This is the moment they have to do it. If they don't do it now, when are they going to do it, James?
Front page of the Daily Mail, Nick? You probably haven't seen it?
Front page of the Daily... I've not seen it, no.
No? Boris, I might axe TV licence.
Yeah. Well, of course.
But that's what so what do you do if you're running the BBC?
You call it out. You're a public service...
Then he might axe the TV licence. Oh, it's a bit of a nonsense story, and it's obviously the mother of all dead cats.
It is a dead cat.
Several years down the line, it's a possibility. It's part of the reason why the corporation is so toothless in the face of attacks organised attacks from right-wing figures, organisations, and quotes, think tanks, end quotes.
I agree with you. I completely.
But what would you do? What would you do?
Oh, well, I've told you.
I know you have, but what? Then they threaten to axe the blinking licence fee, potentially.
Yeah, well, I'm afraid there's a big battle is needed over this, and if it is not started today, on the back of the bonnet being opened, then I don't know when it will be. And if it isn't today, I am so afraid.
Where will it end? Well, I'm with you on the fear, but I'm also going to point out, I sat here the morning after the referendum result, I said if we don't call out these lies and these liars now, they will just move on to new territory with the same tactics. And as Nick highlighted, there we are. And again, while I'm being achingly self-referential, just a quick reference to what James Mitchinson was talking about when he talked about Disneyland and these toxic corners of the internet that are designed to allow people to believe whatever they want to believe and never have their worldviews challenged. Obviously, I've achieved a profile of sorts in the last few years that I didn't have before, which is enormously, incredibly annoying to some people in that world. So you'll be aware I wrote a book last year. At the moment, last time I checked, it's going to be the best-selling political book of 2019. I'm boasting, but for a reason. One of these weird websites that panders to an awful lot of far-right sensibilities, when I was on holiday this summer, described my book as a dud, as a flop, because very successful books get sold for one day for 99p on Amazon as a Kindle edition in order to, as a sort of marketing exercise. Publishers are queuing up to get that kind of access. But I remember the episode, and I mention it now, because at the time I found it hilarious. But in the passing weeks and months, especially when you see contributors to this website pop up in places where they really have no business being, including the BBC, that's how it works. So here's a bloke that keeps pointing out how stupid we were about X. So let's undermine his credibility by telling a lie. And then just look at the queue of people going, I love this lie, I love it so much. I love this lie. But it's a lie, and it never stops being a lie. It's 12:01.